There's a moment in life when everything around you seems normal, even functional, yet something inside you starts to ache. It's not physical. It's not dramatic. It's silent. It's the kind of ache that doesn't scream. It whispers. A gentle nudge, a slight restlessness, a knowing that something is off, even if you can't explain what. And if you've felt that before, you know it's not just a mood. It's a message. You were born with a compass, a subtle but undeniable guidance system designed not by the world, but by the soul. Some call it instinct, others call it intuition. But at its root, it is your inner voice, your connection to the divine intelligence within you. But here's the truth most people avoid. Ignoring that voice doesn't silence it. It only makes your life louder in all the wrong ways. The wrong job gets louder. The wrong relationship gets heavier. The wrong habits grow stronger. The more you deny the whisper, the more the world has to shout to wake you up. And eventually you pay. Not with money, not with time, but with something far more costly. Your peace. Because the greatest currency in the spiritual economy is not success, it's alignment. And alignment can't be taught, it must be remembered. Remembered in the stillness, in the honesty, in the moment you finally say, I knew, I just didn't listen. There's a sacred moment, one you might recognize when you realize that your biggest regrets were never about what you didn't know, but about what you knew and ignored. You saw the red flag, you felt the hesitation, you sensed the subtle discomfort, but instead of pausing, you pushed. Instead of listening, you explained it away. And the tragedy of modern life is this. We've been conditioned to doubt the very voice that was sent to protect us. We're taught to trust logic over intuition, plans over presence, noise over knowing. But when you silence your inner voice long enough, the consequences aren't always immediate. They are slow. They are quiet. And that's what makes them dangerous. You wake up one day in a life that doesn't feel like yours, in a version of success that doesn't bring peace, with people who don't see you because you stopped seeing yourself. This is the cost no one talks about, the erosion of your authentic path in exchange for safety, acceptance, or control. But hear this. Every time you ignore your inner voice, you strengthen the false self. And every time you honor it, you return to the version of you that was never lost, just buried under noise. This is not about guilt. This is about awakening. Because your intuition is not broken. It's just been waiting for you to finally trust that it was right all along. From a young age, you were trained to override your inner signals. Be reasonable. Think it through. Don't be so sensitive. You were taught that intuition was less valuable than intellect, that spiritual knowing was somehow inferior to worldly logic. And so, little by little, you abandoned the very compass that was born inside you. But let's be honest. How many times has your logic gotten you into something your soul had already warned you about? You felt it in your chest. You dreamed about it. You couldn't explain why, but something felt off. And yet you stayed. You signed the contract. You said yes, when every cell in your body whispered no. Why? Because we live in a world that doesn't reward inner truth. It rewards external approval. And so you learn to betray yourself in order to belong. But here's what no one tells you. Every time you betray your inner voice, you lose access to your higher power. Not because God withdraws, but because you disconnect. The universe is not punishing you. It's inviting you back to your center, back to your discernment, back to the inner dialogue that knows the way, even when the map is missing. And that voice? It doesn't shout. It never forces. It waits. It waits for the moment when the noise of the world becomes so loud you finally choose silence. Not because you gave up, but because you gave in to the truth that was never outside you. The problem isn't that you don't hear your inner voice. The problem is that you keep asking for second opinions. You ask the internet. You ask your friends. You ask the version of you that's still afraid of judgment. But here's the truth. Intuition is not a democracy. It doesn't wait for a consensus. It declares. And when you ignore it, not only do you delay your breakthrough, you distort your identity. You start building a life based on expectations, not alignment, on comfort, not calling, and suddenly, the things that should feel light feel heavy. The people who should support you confuse you. The path that should be unfolding feels blocked. Not because you're cursed, not because you're broken, but because you're walking in a direction that was never yours to begin with. Success, peace, clarity, they're not found through force. They're revealed through resonance. You don't need more signs. You need to honor the signs you've already received. The inner voice doesn't need to be explained. It needs to be followed, even if no one else understands. Especially if no one else understands. Because the most authentic decisions often look foolish in the beginning, but they build the kind of legacy that can't be faked. A life that is yours. A direction that finally makes sense. A soul that can rest, because it is no longer at war with itself. There comes a time when external noise becomes unbearable, not because it's loud, but because it contradicts what your soul already knows. This is when silence becomes a sacred strategy. You stop speaking, not out of weakness, but because you realize your voice has been wasted trying to convince people who were never meant to understand. You withdraw, not to escape, but to recalibrate. In that silence, you begin to hear the whispers that got drowned out by urgency, obligation, and fear. The truth is, most people are terrified of being alone, not with the world, but with themselves. Because in solitude, the truth becomes unavoidable. And the truth often reveals that you've been living out someone else's blueprint, wearing someone else's expectations and building someone else's dream. But there is a holy kind of rebellion in becoming unresponsive. Unresponsive to pressure. Unresponsive to guilt. Unresponsive to everything that once dictated your worth. In this silence, you start to recognize that your inner voice isn't just guidance, it's a map back to authenticity. You remember how peace feels. You realize that clarity is not something you chase. It's something you uncover when you stop running from yourself, and you begin to sense a shift from needing permission to giving yourself permission. Permission to trust your instincts, even when logic objects. Permission to slow down, even when culture demands speed. Permission to believe that your inner knowing is more reliable than the loudest advice. This is not passivity, it's precision. It's choosing to stop scattering your power, trying to explain your direction, and instead, pouring that energy into embodying it. Because true manifestation doesn't come from convincing others. It comes from becoming the kind of person who no longer needs to. When you stop engaging with the distractions that once held you captive, a deeper alignment begins. You retreat, not because you're lost, but because you're done pretending that being busy equals being fulfilled. And in this retreat, something sacred happens. The thoughts that once scattered in anxiety start to slow down. The pressure to perform starts to dissolve. And in that stillness you hear it, the original voice. The one that whispered your calling before the world got noisy. It doesn't shout. It never has. It speaks in the language of inner resonance. And it says things that no one around you may understand. Leave now. Wait longer. Say no. Speak. Change everything. Most people ignore this voice. Why? Because it rarely makes sense to the mind. It requires trust. It requires risk. It requires you to believe in something before you can see it. And so they choose the path of external validation, of making decisions that look right but feel wrong, of settling for comfort when their destiny requires fire, of staying loyal to fear disguised as logic. But not you. You're not here to outsource your knowing. You're here to embody it. You're not here to follow noise. You're here to follow alignment. And that means making peace with misunderstanding. It means you'll walk away from what's familiar and toward what's true. It means you'll be seen as irrational, intense, even rebellious, until your results speak for you. And they will. Because the one who aligns in silence is often the one who arrives with impact. You're not delaying your future by waiting in stillness. You're becoming the kind of person your future requires. And that is the most powerful act of trust there is. There comes a moment in every awakened life when silence stops being a punishment and starts becoming a portal to clarity, a portal to truth, a portal to God. You begin to realize that your delays were never denials, they were divine detours. And the silence you once feared? It was God's protection disguised as stillness. But most never see it that way. They mistake silence for abandonment. They interpret unanswered prayers as rejection. They assume that when their plans fall apart, it's because they failed. But what if the falling apart was the answer? What if God isn't giving you what you asked for because it's too small? What if He's trying to make space, not for punishment, but for preparation? Because here's the truth. God doesn't operate on demand. He operates on design. And design requires alignment. It requires that you stop negotiating with your intuition and start obeying it. It requires that you stop forcing what you can't feel and trust what you can't yet explain. Faith isn't just believing in what's coming. It's aligning your steps as if it's already here. But that's hard to do when your mind is louder than your spirit. So God quiets you, not to punish you, but to recalibrate you. He'll close doors not to trap you, but to reroute you. He'll delay breakthroughs not to frustrate you, but to mature you. Because the version of you that made the request is not yet ready for the reward. And God is more interested in your becoming than your arriving. So He waits. Not out of indifference, but out of love. Because He knows, a vision fulfilled in the wrong season is a vision wasted. When God grows quiet, most people panic. They scramble for signs, beg for confirmation, chase quick answers. But those who walk in wisdom, they know. Silence is not the absence of God. It's the presence of trust being formed. In the stillness, something sacred is happening. Your identity is being refined. Your attachments are being loosened. Your discernment is being sharpened. And your spiritual muscles, once weak from chasing the external, are finally being trained to listen inwardly. Because before God answers publicly, He whispers privately. He waits for you to trust the whisper more than the noise. He waits for you to follow the nudge even when there's no applause. He waits for you to act not from fear, but from conviction. Quiet, steady, unshakable conviction. This is the cost of spiritual maturity. You stop needing signs to believe. You stop asking permission to obey. You stop explaining your path to people who were never meant to walk it with you. Because the more you listen, the clearer the voice becomes. Not louder, clearer. Not because God changed His tone, but because you finally tuned your ears. This is how you grow into alignment. Not through striving, but through surrender. Not through speed, but through stillness. Not by pushing harder, but by hearing deeper. And in that deep listening, you begin to realize every ignored whisper was a delayed breakthrough. Every postponed decision was a missed alignment. And every time you chose logic over soul, you postponed a miracle that was already assigned to you. But today, something shifts. Not because you shouted louder, but because you finally got quiet enough to hear what God was saying all along. I never left you. I was preparing you. Success, when aligned with soul, does not arrive through force. It flows through integrity. It's not just about doing the right thing. It's about being the right person when no one's watching. And when you finally align your inner yes with your outer actions, something powerful happens. You stop chasing and start attracting. This is not magic. It's law. The law of alignment says, what belongs to you cannot find you until you become who it's looking for. That vision you had? It wasn't just imagination. It was an invitation. That intuition you suppressed? It wasn't a fleeting feeling. It was your future knocking softly, asking, will you trust me this time? And the moment you say yes, fully, silently without waiting for confirmation, the spiritual economy shifts in your favor. Doors open without announcements. People appear without effort. Resources arrive without begging, because heaven is not moved by desperation. It's moved by alignment. This is the quiet reward most people never receive. Not because it wasn't available, but because they refused to become the version of themselves who could receive it. They wanted the harvest without surrendering the seed. They wanted clarity without cultivating inner stillness. But not you. If you've made it this far, it means something in your spirit is already awakening. It means you're no longer willing to betray your voice for validation, or your vision for temporary comfort. And that is the moment. Not of arrival, but of readiness. Because God does not reward noise. He rewards obedience. And when you finally obey your inner voice, without delay, without doubt, that's when the real blessings begin to unfold. There's a version of you that already lives in the answer you've been praying for. But you don't become that version through strategy alone. You become it through surrender, through saying yes when it would be easier to compromise, through walking away from what's convenient, to walk toward what's aligned. And that path is never paved with applause. It's paved with silence. The silence of early mornings where you choose discipline over delay. The silence of lonely decisions where no one claps but heaven leans in. The silence of small steps, invisible to the world, but magnetic in the spirit. This is the cost most won't pay. They want to skip to the reward without becoming the vessel. They want success to crown the uncommitted, opportunity to chase the unprepared, miracles to find those who ignored the whisper. But real power doesn't work that way. Your inner voice is not just your guide, it is your agreement. Every time you silence it, you delay the reward. Every time you honor it, you strengthen the contract. And over time, not by force, not by fame, but by quiet integrity, you become the person your future was waiting on. That's when blessings show up without invitation. That's when opportunities knock without noise. And that's when your life stops being a chase and starts becoming a magnet. Because when you walk in alignment with your soul, you don't attract what you want. You attract what you are. There comes a moment, quiet, unannounced, when the noise of the world fades just enough for you to hear what's always been there. The whisper, the one you silenced, to fit in, the one you doubted, to feel safe, the one you ignored, to be accepted. But that voice never left. It waited. It watched as you wandered, distracted by what glitters but never fulfills. It watched as you collected advice but lost touch with your own truth. And now, here, in this moment, it's calling again. Not with urgency, not with guilt, but with the soft, sacred tone of destiny. Because your life is not meant to be a repetition of someone else's path. It's meant to be a revelation of your own, and no one else can walk it for you. So if this message spoke to something deep in you, something ancient, something sacred, don't let it fade into another inspiring video. Let it become your turning point. Let it be the moment where you come back to your voice, your vision, your vow. Write in the comments below, I will no longer betray my soul. I listen. I align. I become. This is not just a phrase. It is your signature. It is your permission. It is your return. And from this silence, a new life will begin.